so much for joining me on the Creative Awakening Now podcast. I'm your host, David Matters, and I'm here to bring you stories, interviews, and insights relating to the topics of creativity, inspiration, and practice. My intention is to connect with other people who employ a heart-centered approach to the artistic process and to share this profoundly inspiring content with anyone who cares to hear it. I hope you enjoy. This is a dream, a dream is never the same. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining me. It's been a minute. It's been several weeks, maybe a month now, since I've been able to put out a podcast. I said that a while ago that it was going to slow down for a bit. It's going to be a bit of a hiatus, and it's taken over a little more than I anticipated, but such is life. For many of you who know me and know this podcast or know my music, you'll know that my band Life Like Water is currently running a Kickstarter to raise money to record our first full-length album. We have a 6-song EP already recorded. I've shared some of those songs on some of these episodes, solo episodes in the past, but this is going to be our first full-length. And we've had it up and running for a couple weeks now, and we are, I think this morning I checked, we're 68% there. We're super close. It's feeling very, very good, feeling very likely that it's going to come together. But I really wanted to put out a podcast in the meantime for these last 2 weeks. And if you listen to this in the future and it's done, it's not like this is going to be irrelevant. This is going to be a podcast all about my personal journey with music. And though it sounds cliche, really how music has saved my life, how it's transformed my life. And I know so many people who've had a similar experience. And yeah, it is cliche to say such a thing, but it's so true. Art and music and different creative paths are so powerful. They have the power to transform our lives in many ways. And for me in particular, I can't even begin to think about my life without music. And I came into it rather late, comparatively. I mean, I have friends who've been playing music since they're 4 or 5 years old. So yeah, this podcast is gonna be about. It's just gonna be a little storytelling about my journey and up to where I am now, and the significance of that with this new album, because this is, for me personally, being that this is all my original music that I've written, and my bandmates obviously contribute an incredible amount to the writing process, which is great, but the bones of it, the lyrics, the melodies, the structure, all that has been my creation. It's stuff that I've been working on for a number of years now, and I feel better about this project and this record in particular than I've felt about anything I've ever done in the past. It's just so true and real to me and who I am and my journey thus far. So it's poignant in my life at this point that I want to share this. And I've written about it in little snippets before, and for a while I was working on a book about music and my personal journey with it, but also just like the greater context of creativity, and put that on the back burner as well because things started getting so crazy with music and life. But hopefully someday I'll pick that back up. But if you haven't heard me talk about these things, it'll all be new. So I look forward to sharing it. And yeah, I guess really I just got to start from the beginning. And, I grew up in a small town, very small town in rural northwestern Pennsylvania, surrounded by Amish communities and farmers. A majority of my childhood, at least like early tweens, if you will, into my teens and stuff, I lived on, my parents took over my grandparents' property when they got too old to be able to take care of this property themselves. It was this big piece of property that they bought back in the day for really cheap, because out there's nothing. And so we grew up on that out in the middle of nowhere. It was beautiful out there, but we had so little contact with the outside world, friends or community or family or anything. It was before we could drive, we were basically isolated, myself and my 2 brothers. And my parents would work all day, and in the summer we would be kind of left to our own devices. My grandparents were next door, and they'd check in on us, make sure we weren't killing each other or burning the house down. But for the most part, it was just us out there. And up until, what was it? I believe I was 13 years old. My older brother and I, we went and we got in a bunch of trouble, and we committed some crimes, if you will, and no need to go into deep detail about that, but we were stupid, made stupid decisions, and we got caught and got in a bunch of trouble, a whole lot of trouble. And the only thing that saved me from being in much more trouble was the fact that I was so young. I think I was 13 and my brother was 15, or maybe it was 14 and 16. I don't remember. We were both underage, and there was a couple of us out there. And after we got busted and we got in control, we were basically got into trouble. We were basically on lockdown on this property, and we had nothing to do and nowhere to go. And my parents were very concerned about us. And so they ended up getting us involved in this local church, in this youth group. And I mean, we grew up, somewhat religious. My family my parents would consider themselves Christians, I'm sure. And up to that point, it just was all that we knew, but growing up in that area. So going to church wasn't a terrible thing for us. It was just like, we knew it was punishment. But fortunately, the youth pastor that was involved there was really cool, actually, like a really good guy, really encouraging and really loving. And he never had like judgments about our situation, and never looked at us like we were criminals. He wanted to just help us, wanted to help my family. And so one of the things that he did that really inspired me was he held these youth groups in the town that we went to school in. And I think once or twice a week I'd go to them, and it was kind of like an accountability thing. But he was a musician, and he would pretty much every day that I was there, he'd be out on the front porch playing his acoustic guitar and singing these songs, and it made this serious impact on me. I mean, I had loved music my whole life, since I was really young. I never played it. My parents never played it. They didn't even have like record collections or CDs or anything. They were not music people. But as soon as I got my hands on CDs and tapes and things like that, I would just get obsessed with it, and I would find the things that I loved, and I would dive into them so deep. I remember falling asleep with headphones on many a times to an album, and it would play through, and I'd wake back up, and it just made this deep impression on me. But I never even really considered playing music because it was so foreign to me. I had one uncle or two uncles who played music that I'd see like once a year playing at the family reunion, and I was always very impressed by that. But again, it was so distant. And so I started hanging out with this youth pastor, and his music really started to inspire me. And at the same time, I was in middle school, I believe. And over the next year or two, I ended up meeting a couple of friends who became like the most formative friends I ever had at that age, that were also musicians and really inspired me. My one buddy, Randy, in particular, he played bass, and he had all this love for music that he kind of shared with me. And immediately I connected with it, and I was like, this is what I want. And it wasn't until I was 16 that I got my first bass guitar. My parents said they would pay for half of it if I came up with the rest of the money. It was like $150 or something, super cheap Johnson bass guitar. It was blue, the white pick guard on it, one of those really cheap ones, but I loved it. And I would sit in my room every night. And I mean, every night, like I didn't know how to play it. I never had lessons. I never could afford to get lessons or anything like that. But I would listen to CDs, and I would just hold it in my arms, even before I had an amp for it. And I would just play it. And eventually, I got into it more and more, to where I started to understand, like, changing these frets and, these. I didn't have any sense of theory, but I would just recognize patterns and follow them. And so, yeah, I started following that line, and I was listening to punk rock at that point. And like pop punk was the beginning of it, and it kind of evolved slowly. And I mean, within the first year of having that bass, I formed my very first band. And we initially had some other names for it, but it turned into this band called Organized Noise. My buddy Sean and myself, and a couple other people that came in and out, and we were 16 or so, and just wailing away in the garage, punk rock music. And the thing that was so powerful at this time was that because I never had it as a young person, because I never had that outlet, I didn't have any outlet really. My older brother was an artist. He loved drawing. I feel like my younger brother had his interest that he was into as well. But at that point, I didn't know what I was into. And I was really insecure when I was in middle school, and even up before that. I was pretty overweight, and I was just like this I don't know, I was weird. I was punk rock kid. I had a mohawk. I was fat. It was before I could grow facial hair, so I had a really gross mustache. And, like, just, I was doing what I could to find my place, but really I was very insecure. And I was very unsure of my life and myself. And I didn't like school. I didn't get along with my teachers. And I was in trouble a lot and all these things. And all of a sudden, music, when I got a hold of it and I grabbed it in my hands and I started understanding it and learning how to play it, it just it did something to me that nothing else had ever done up to that point. It motivated me. It gave me hope in a way that I didn't even understand at the time. I couldn't even comprehend. It just felt good. Looking back at it, I realized like how important it was, because I was like a lot of kids. I was just totally lost, like just acting out, being crazy, trying to find my place, trying to fit in, trying to be accepted. And music allowed me to stop worrying so much about what other people thought and about who I, was trying to be and what I wanted other people to see. And so, I mean, in that regard, just right there, music really did save me from that confusion. And as I got older, I was playing bass guitar in these punk rock bands. I mean, my whole high school was this small town, and there was like no music around there. And all of a sudden, we started like going out in waves. Like all of our friends started playing music, and then more people played music. And before we knew it, this tiny little town of Corey, Pennsylvania, had like a music scene, and it was absurd. We were playing in garages and basements in the community center and wherever we could, and there was terrible sound systems if we had any, and really loud, aggressive music that parents clearly didn't understand. But we loved it, and we built this community. And we started, at this point, people were, we were driving and things, so we would go to the next town over, and there's a town about a half hour from me, 45 minutes, that had the only actual concert hall there. It was a converted movie theater with a stage and a sound system and a sound guy, and to us it was totally rock star status, and we started playing there, and all my friends, like all the communities around us, we made these connections in the punk rock scene, and it was just life-changing for me. We would get together and there'd be 30, 40, 50 of us, all these gnarly punk rock kids with our mohawks and our plaid pants, and everyone just trying to be this thing that we thought was true and thought was real, and thought was authentic, and like young kids do. And for us it was, but it was so powerful to have that community and based all around music, and as the years went on, the taste evolved, and I started playing more like heavier music and got into like hardcore, and then it evolved into like, I don't know, metal, in certain degrees. And we continued playing in that same venue through these different transitions for a number of years. They've since closed. I mean, it's been years since I go back to that area once a year maybe, and it's been closed for quite a while. But that venue and a handful of other ones around they were the stomping grounds for us. We'd get together on a weekend, didn't matter who was playing, everyone was there. And some of those people I still talk to and have supported me through my music up to this day. And that is just so powerful and so beautiful to me. I'm so grateful for it. But through this time, I was still kind of like figuring things out. I didn't like get over my insecurities or anything overnight, but I was working on it. But right before I turned 18, I got in a whole bunch more trouble with my family. Had been all kinds of things at school and got suspended and all these things, and they were just fed up. I was being a little shit, but they had 3 kids, and life was hard. They didn't have much. We didn't have a lot of money, and there was a lot of pressure on them, and it got to a point where we were just battling it out. And I remember on my 18th birthday, I went and I got a tattoo on my hand, and I got 2 piercings in my lip, and I came home, and my parents looked at me, took one look, and they said, "Take those out of your face or leave." And at this time, I had been living, or I had my van, this I think it was the same age as me. It was like an 86 Dodge conversion van, like the fold back seats. It was sweet, and I loved that thing. And when they told me to leave, I was like, that's exactly what I want. So I packed my bags and I left that night. And from that moment on, I had been on my own. On my 18th birthday, I started living in my van. I was still in high school. I finished out my senior year somehow. in my van, and that was the next major turning point for me, was playing music to that degree where at night, all my other friends were home. They were with their families doing what they had to do, and here I was in the Pizza Hut parking lot. I was working at Pizza Hut at the time, living in my van, and I had just got an acoustic guitar at this point. I wanted to learn guitar. So I got this acoustic, and I would sit up till 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning every single night, just wailing away, teaching myself how to play guitar, writing these cheesy songs and listening to my favorite CDs and tapes in the van. And it was a sense of freedom that I can't even describe. At that age, with that much angst, and that much, I don't know, hope for the future, I was so driven. I played every day, and I played for hours and hours. And eventually I actually figured out what I was doing and learned how to play relatively well, and was playing hardcore music at this point, and like metal music, and was learning drop D and learning all these like crusty riffs, and started the next band, like the next big band. I had a bunch of little bands in between that, but the next big band was called Hand in Hand, and it was like loud screaming metal music, and my couple best friends that I had been playing music with since the beginning in the punk rock days, we all made this transition together, and they would show up at my van in the morning on the weekends, and we would just jam whenever we could, even if it was just acoustic guitars and screaming, and we would write all this music. And that was when I really started honing my writing skills in, because I started getting into poetry, and I was reading the lyrics of other artists that I loved, and I would fill notebooks with poetry and with song lyrics. And I was one of the main writers for all the projects that I've ever been in, both musically and lyrically. And a couple of my friends contributed as well. It wasn't just me, but because of that, it put this like deep love of arranging and creating and composing into me. And so I did that for years. I continued living in my van until when I was 20 or 21 or something. A lot of my friends everyone was graduated. People started leaving. One buddy went to the military. Another friend went across the country somewhere else. Other friends went to college. People were getting married. All these things were happening, and I had nothing. I was still living in my van. At this point, I had transitioned into a different vehicle. I'd lived in like 3 or 4 at this point. They all kept breaking down. And I was in this little town, and for a good year or so, I was with this girl who I really was my first real girlfriend, and I had my band and had my girlfriend and was in love, and all these things. And at one moment, it just all fell apart. My band broke up because everyone was leaving, doing different things, having different interests. My girlfriend and we broke up. A lot of my friends left. I had no money. I was working at Taco Bell, I think, just miserable. And I was sitting up one night, and I was just like, it's time to do something. It's time to move on from here. And up to this point, I had never traveled much. But I wanted to, but had no money. And where I grew up, in small town, rural Pennsylvania, nobody traveled. Nobody hitchhiked or got out. I didn't even know such a thing existed, which sounds crazy if you grew up on the West Coast or something. But I literally knew nobody who had hitchhiked, or anyone who knew anyone who had. But that's what I wanted to do. I was reading Jack Kerouac at the time, and a lot of the beat poets, and his journeys on the road, and Dharma bums and stuff about traveling across the country and hitchhiking and writing poetry. It was all so romantic to me. And as I made that decision, I was like, all right, that's it. That's my next step. And all my friends thought I was crazy. I mean, a lot of them admired me, I think, and looked up to that decision, but also thought I was nuts for even thinking of it. And my parents, who I wasn't very close with at this time, obviously, but they still feared for me, were definitely freaked out by my ideas. But I had this deep conviction that I was just going to go on the road, and I was just going to play music, and I was going to figure it out from there. I was going to just do it for like a month at first. I wanted to go to the West Coast. I wanted to go see the redwoods. I wanted to see the Pacific Ocean. I wanted to go to Venice Beach and, meet people and play music. That's what I wanted. That was my only plan. I had about $20 in my pocket, and I got a rucksack, brought a bunch of books and, a couple pairs of clothes, and that was that. I got a ride out of Pittsburgh. I remember came down. Surprisingly, the first place I ever stopped was outside of Asheville, This was like 20, 21 years old. I only stayed for like 2 days, and then continued hitching on south. I ended up getting picked up by these rainbow gathering kids outside of Florida. And I went to my first rainbow gathering in Ocala, Florida. Stayed there for a little while. Went out to New Orleans. Went up through Texas and Arizona and all that. And then I got a ride from a long haul trucker outside of Texas and went all the way to LA and got dropped off on the side of the highway and had to navigate my way on foot through most of the city, which was insane. Sleeping on the streets. I slept on a sidewalk right in the middle of downtown for the first time and was just totally freaked out and, excited, but also like didn't know if I was going to get arrested or get mugged or what. But, in the early days of that kind of stuff, it was all new for me. But I made it to the Pacific Ocean and I made it to the Redwoods. And at that point, I realized that this for me was life. Like I felt so free. I felt so inspired. Music and poetry was just like flowing through me. And I was like, I'm not stopping. I'm just going to keep going. So I hitched all the way up the Pacific coastline. I went all the way to the 1 and the 101 and hitched up the coastline. I wanted to see the ocean the whole way. Went up through Oregon and Washington. And I got up to Seattle. And I remembered that my one good friend went to Alaska. His sister had lived there and he was working out there. And I had a little bit of money left from income tax, I think, from the last job that I worked. It was just perfect serendipitous time. I connected with someone back home, got me that money, and I bought a plane ticket to Alaska. And these stories, I could go on. And I don't want to get too far off topic, but I stayed up in Alaska for 6 months. And it was winter when I got there, so I hunkered down for the first couple months until spring came, and then just started hitching all over Alaska, going to all the best places that I could imagine and meeting all kinds of crazy people. And that's when my music started kicking up to the next level, because a good friend of mine, Meadow, ended up buying me my first banjo, which I didn't ask her to. I still to this day, it baffles me. She just went to this pawn shop, had this money, and got this 5-string resonator banjo that I had never even touched a banjo, but I loved it, and I had talked about wanting to play. And I accepted the gift, of course, and from that point on, my passion went right there. I started playing every day, learning as much as I could, trying to learn from other people, and still couldn't take lessons or anything, but just dove in deep and started getting into old time music and folk music. And my taste from going from punk rock to metal to like, I don't even know how to explain it, like jug band music to old time music into full on bluegrass eventually was such an interesting transition for me. The banjo was really the gateway. I just loved it so much. And at the same time, I was really learning how to sing, teaching myself how to sing, because I was playing street music and I needed to learn how to project. That when I'm busking, I had to sing loudly. And so it all kind of came together at once. And my love and my passion for music just quadrupled overnight, basically, with this instrument. And I spent the next 2.5 years traveling. 3 years at least. I mean, I was on the road for about 3.5, 4 years before I finally stopped, and nonstop hitchhiking. My buddy and I, we traveled all through Alaska, hitchhiking all around there. We drove from Alaska back to Pennsylvania through Canada, which took us a month because we didn't have any money. We stopped at different cities along the way and played street music and made enough money to fill a tank, have a drink, get some food, and go to the next city. And we just did that day after day after day after day. And if we didn't make enough money, we would stay in that place until we did. And so I was writing music like crazy, just needed enough material to be playing street music for hours every day. And that was it. Like that was the biggest, most formative musical stretch that I had ever taken on at that point. And it fueled me. It fueled me so deeply. I felt so content. I felt so alive. And, it was still early on in my travels, within the first year or so of being on the road. And everything at that point is just beautiful. Like, I was still just a young kid being crazy, drinking too much, partying too much, but just loving life. And we ended up, after coming back to Pennsylvania, we hitched more. We went, picked up another friend, and we hitchhiked from Pennsylvania down along the southern border to the coast, or the border of Mexico, crossed the border on foot, and hitchhiked the entire way down the western coast of Mexico, all the way down through Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. It was about an 8-month trip that we took. Just the same thing, no money, no provisions, we didn't even speak Spanish. We just went down there and we just figured it out. Played music along the way. He had a hand drum, a conga, and a doumbek between the two of them, and I was playing banjo, which sounds ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, but it worked. And we just wrote all this music together, and we would just perform and make enough money to eat and sleep and continue on. And I mean, it was one of the most insane, probably very dangerous, challenging experiences of my life, but it was also so powerful, so formative. And we did that. After that, I thought I was going to be done. I went back to Pennsylvania to try and figure it out, but could not integrate back into normal life. I was just totally gone. My mind was just, I couldn't settle at all. I mean, I was back in Pennsylvania for maybe 2 months or something, and I ended up getting a Greyhound ticket, went out to Yellowstone National Park, worked out there for a season with a buddy of mine, still had my banjo, was playing music. After that, ended up hitching down to Boulder, Colorado, where I thought I was going to stop. I was planning on going to Naropa, and stayed there for a few months trying to get things in order, but realized that I couldn't get everything together in time. So I couldn't start that semester, so I had another 6 months to figure things out. And it was wintertime in Boulder, it was cold, it just crazy life circumstances. I mean, I was getting in a bunch of trouble just being a vagrant. You know, cops are always hassling you. We had a van at one point that got crashed, and then the cops towed it away with all of our stuff in it. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, some friends of another friend showed up with this 32-foot RV and said, "Hey, we're going out to the West Coast. You know, we're going to do this." I don't know. They had this like hippie commune dream, you know, finding land or something, having this sustainable community, or I don't even remember what it was exactly, but I was on. I was like, yep, perfect. Let's go to the West Coast again. So we went out on this RV, went out to the West Coast with many stops in between to make money. And same thing, playing music, busking, making all this money, trying to fund this trip because it was so much gas to just move that thing along. But we did it. We got all the way out to the West Coast, went back up the northern coast, up to Northern California, came back down to Southern California. And at this point, things were starting to get really quite tricky in life. There was lots of friends with addiction issues, people getting arrested all the time and getting hassled everywhere we went. I think we were just like a scene, you know, it was like back in the day of the Merry Pranksters with the bus, you know, further, and just like all these hippies traveling around. That's what we looked like, basically. And everywhere we went, we were getting hassled. And because everyone was so drunk and stoned all the time, there was a lot of issues. And at a certain point, I realized that I had to get away and go off on my own again, because it was tearing my spirit apart. It was just, I hadn't been writing music or anything. I was just getting drunk every day and really going down the tubes. And so I went with a couple of those people. We went out to this place called Slab City in Southern California. It's this little desert commune out in the middle of nowhere. Used to be it's an abandoned military base, and it's just a free-for-all out there. And I don't know, I think we were out there for like a good month, and that was just kind of like rejuvenating, like just being out there with nothing. I mean, there was lots of drinking and partying going on, but it was just in the desert. I got my dog Patience out there. I found him as a pup. Yeah, I mean, there's just so much more stuff. Went back across the country, went back down to Austin, Texas, met up with some other friends in there and started playing music with them in Oklahoma. Went back to Pennsylvania to another rainbow gathering. Finally made my way back out to Boulder after like another 6 months to actually go to school. And that was the next major turning point in my life. Because I thought that the only way I could stop living that life and to get my shit together and to, you know, stay out of trouble and stay sober, at least relatively, was to go to school. Like, I had no other options. Like, my family couldn't help me. I left all my friends and everything behind. I didn't have any direction. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to play music. I wanted to write. I wanted to just have a community. And so I started going to Naropa, which was both an amazing and a ridiculous decision. But when going there, I doubled down on my music again, started writing a lot, took all these writing classes, was taking like permaculture courses, and going to Naropa was a major turning point for me for a couple of things. But one of those was studying and practicing Buddhist meditation. It's a Buddhist-inspired college, and going there, I had already, being on the road like that, you get exposed to all kinds of stuff, all kinds of spiritual traditions, religions, shamanic traditions. I mean, I had been into it all to some degree, psychedelics, everything. But meditation had this very strong hold on me. But I didn't really understand it, and I couldn't really practice it. I would do my best, but it was very flighty. And going there actually gave me the discipline. I met some great people who were really inspiring, and my music, along with meditation, was really what I took away from that experience. That really elevated me. I kind of found my way in that. I was still doing the same stuff, and I eventually dropped out of school. I only went for 2 years because I realized how much debt I was getting in. Before going to school, I didn't even have a bank account. I didn't even own a cell phone. The whole time, all those years on the road, I didn't have a phone. I didn't have social media. I didn't have a computer. Didn't have a bank account. I had no debt. It was totally free. And then going to school changed all that. And it was this really like grating situation for me that ultimately I couldn't handle. And at the same time, two amazing things happened at basically the same time. I met my partner, who's my partner today, Jen, and we eventually down the road had our daughter, Zara. And if it wasn't for that decision to go out there, I never would have met them. So, I'm grateful for that alone. But also, I formed my last serious band that I was in before doing Life Like Water, Gypsy Moon, with my friends Mackenzie and Silas and Colin. Originally, that was the original lineup. But Mackenzie and I and Silas, we basically founded this band. And it was the most serious music I had ever done before, the most well thought out, and it was just good music. These guys were all very talented, and I was very dedicated. I wasn't exactly a great musician at that point, but I was very serious songwriter, and I had some chops. But being with them and being around that music scene out there outside of Nederland, Colorado, was really the grounds that helped me grow and build my musical abilities to where I'm at now, because I was just so motivated being around all these talented people. And the music we were creating, it was bluegrass-ish. I was playing banjo and guitar and singing, and a lot of it was, some of our big influences that inspired us were just bands, Green Sky Bluegrass and Infamous String Dusters and Yonder Mountain String Band and Leftover Salmon and all those like newgrass bands. And we were also listening to a lot of like gypsy jazz and different things like that. So we had this twist on our sound. But that was revolutionary for me. That music and that project was so powerful. We got quite successful quite quickly. Largely because we had some seriously good connections out there, but also because we pushed really hard and wrote good music. We were headlining some of the biggest venues in Boulder and Denver out there, or at least opening for other acts at them regularly. And we're playing all the big festivals, and to me, it was a dream come true. It felt like everything I had ever wanted. But like most things, when you push really hard, there's going to be some resistance, and there's going to be some backlash, and ultimately that didn't work out for the band. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of turmoil, interpersonally, and my life, especially having a kid, and I had to pay the rent, I had to work, I had to do all these things while at the same time being in this like supercharged band that everyone was like so motivated to make successful, and most of the other people didn't really have to work. They didn't have to like I had to provide for a child. So there was a lot of ugliness that came out of it, and a lot of excess. We were just partying so much, and far too many substances and silliness, and it got to a point where it just couldn't go any longer. And ultimately, through all kinds of unfortunate, unpleasant events, I left the band, and after leaving and all the break from those people in my community, I couldn't stand being around there anymore. It just hurt too much. And so we ended up totally uprooting our family and leaving, traveling across the country, going to Michigan. And we were in Michigan for about 7 months, just kind of figuring out what we were going to do. And in this time, I went through this serious, deep depression that was at once like it tore me apart, but it also allowed me to see like where I was lacking in myself, like, you know, why I let that hurt me so much and why I was struggling so hard to, I don't know, to find meaning in life without that band. And I started meditating every day at that point, and I started really looking inside, you know, what is it that I can't do on my own that band provided for me, you know. And I realized that music, though I stepped away from the thing that I really wanted and I thought was it. As soon as I did step away from it, I realized that there was something so much deeper inside of me that I was not allowing out. And really, it was my own true expression. I had been so worried about success and worried about like writing the best music, you know, doing what I needed to do to impress other people or you know, impress my bandmates or whatever it was. And because of that, I didn't listen to my own true heart about what I wanted to create. And it took me through this very tumultuous path that I was reassessing who I was, what I wanted, what was important to me, what kind of music I wanted to create. You know, and I had all these other influences that I was in love with, but hadn't really focused on. So in this time, that's what I did. And I started, like I said, I was meditating every day, and I was playing music and studying different styles. I started studying fingerstyle guitar. I started listening to world music a lot of West African music, a lot of Indian music. And I just opened up. And it took a while. It took, you know, 7-8 months. I mean, probably more than that, probably about a year until I finally got out of that funk I was in. I mean, I call it depression, and maybe it was, but it was so formative. It's kind of hard to look at it like that too. It changed so much about me. And by the time we got our stuff together and we came down to North Carolina, where we live now, you know, in Asheville, and I started playing music down here and tried to start forming a band, I had this whole new outlook on life and this whole new form of practice and the sense of perseverance and diligence that I was doing what I wanted to do and that I was going to make it work. I stopped worrying about being successful. I stopped worrying about what other people thought about me, and I just focused on what I wanted to do, exactly how I wanted to do it, and, you know, finding people who were compatible with that. And man, I don't even know how it happened. It just, that's how life is. It worked out. I found the people that I need. I found Megan and I found Charles and some other people along the way too, but started making the music that is now Life Like Water. And everything about where I'm at now feels right. Everything about this music and about what I have to say and sing about, like, it's coming from this authentic place within me. You know, and I think it's getting some traction. It's been a couple years now. It's been almost about 3 years that I've been playing with Megan. We recorded our first song. I mean, the first year or so we didn't really do much. So it's, since getting Charles in the band is when we really took off, about a little over a year ago. But now it feels right. That's all I can say. I love it. It feels, it gives me a sense of wholeness in my creative heart. And that has more power and more worth than any amount of money or success. I'm convinced of that. Like, sure, I would love to be making more money and providing for my family with this and not also having to work full time, killing myself physically doing manual labor and, you know, hustling, just trying to get by. But that's secondary to this state of contentment and peace and knowing who I am. I mean, I really owe as much to my meditation practice as I do to music. At one point, they just merged into one, and they haven't separated since. I mean, things wax and wane depending on my life, just like this podcast. You know, things get too busy, I have to step away from things. But ultimately, it all feels one. It all feels connected. And that's where I'm at. And that's what I wanted to share with you. I hope that it was at least somewhat interesting and entertaining. There's a lot of rambling. So many stories that I could just go off in tangents about in every single layer of my life from that point to where I am now. But I wanted to keep it somewhat concise. It's already longer than I hoped it would be, but I just had to get it in there. But I hope it inspires you in some way and makes you, it resonates more than anything. I hope you can see that kind of experience in yourself. And if not, then I hope it does inspire you to find your own way, because, not that I'm some big success or, someone to look up to in that way, but I feel like having this sense of gratitude and peace is really like something to aspire towards. And I feel my musical writing and my ability to put things together has grown exponentially because of the difficult times and because of the whole journey. And I think that's with everyone. Like, the more you go through, the more times you fall down and pick yourself back up, the more resilience you have, and you learn a little more from it each time, and you can build that and put it into your creative practice. And that's what I hope. I hope you have a similar experience with that. And if you are at all interested in my music, and if you're listening right now, if it's currently September 14th, 2019, we have until September 28th until the Kickstarter is done. We are 68% there, just a little bit more, and we're going to make this record happen. And you can really hear all that I talked about in this creative form. It's all coming through. All these songs come from that space, and that's why I'm so excited to have it all and to include it all. So I would be so grateful. We would all be so grateful if you wanted to donate to this project, and you get great gifts in return. You get the album, but with more and more higher donations, you get more things. I'm doing some Hamburg jewelry. Megan's making some wall art. Charles just sold 2 drums, so that's not happening anymore. But we're giving lessons, house shows, T-shirts, stickers. We got all kinds of stuff. So if you want to do that, go to Kickstarter.com. Check out, search for Life Like Water. I think it says Life Like Water's first full-length album or something. And you can go on there, create a little account, and donate, and be a part of this process and help us make it. And like I said, I'd be so grateful. I couldn't ask of anything more from my listeners to be a part of this project, because it's all one. This podcast came out of all that as well. And I do hope to get back to this a little bit more, do more podcasts in the future, even if they're just solo. I just haven't had time to do more interviews. It's a lot of work with everything I got going on now. But anyway, I'm going to stop my ranting. Thank you so much for listening. Check out our Kickstarter. Check out my website, creativeawakeningnow.com. Check us out, Life Like Water, on Instagram and on Facebook. And reach out. Send me an email. Let's get in contact. And thank you. I hope you have a wonderful day.